the artist as architect, Andy Warhol, Leonardo da Vinci, and the reinvention of cultural influence. Introduction. In the grand narrative of Western art, the figure of the artist has traditionally been cast as a singular genius, a creator whose influence flows downward from the peak of masterful creation. Leonardo da Vinci, the archetypal Renaissance man, stands as the supreme icon of this model, a polymath whose transcendent talent, validated by the highest echelons of power, reshaped the aesthetic possibilities of his time. His influence was a function of scarcity, mastery, and the aura of the unique object, disseminated through a hierarchical system of patronage and apprenticeship. This report will argue that Andy Warhol, 5 centuries later, did not merely follow in this tradition or react against it. He fundamentally re-architected the very mechanisms of cultural influence. In stark contrast to the Leonardesque paradigm, Warhol's impact stemmed from the systematic dismantling and reassembly of the boundaries between art, commerce, media, and identity. He understood that in the media-saturated landscape of post-war America, power no longer resided solely in the creation of masterful objects, but in the control and manipulation of the image itself. Where Leonardo's influence was predicated on depth and authenticity, Warhol's was built on the strategic management of the surface. He did not simply create new art. He created a new operational blueprint for culture, one that inverted the relationship between artist and patron, original and copy, high and low culture, and ultimately, creator and commodity. This analysis will dissect these two profoundly different models of cultural architecture. It will demonstrate how Warhol, by replacing the pursuit of transcendent mastery with the production and branding of images, including his own, became not just a pivotal artist, but a primary architect of modern consciousness, designing the framework for the celebrity-driven, media-saturated, and hyper-commercialized reality of the 21st century. Section I. The Archetype of Genius, Leonardo da Vinci and the Traditional Model of Influence. To comprehend the scale of Andy Warhol's cultural revolution, one must first establish the paradigm he so thoroughly dismantled. This traditional model of artistic influence, which held sway for centuries, finds its ultimate expression in the life and work of Leonardo da Vinci. He represents the artist as a universal genius, a figure whose extraordinary, almost divine talent is recognized and cultivated by the dominant cultural and political powers of the era. In this framework, influence is a top-down phenomenon. It originates from a singular, masterful creator, is legitimized by an elite system of patronage, and is disseminated through the creation of unique, inimitable works and the direct tutelage of apprentices. Leonardo's career provides the definitive case study of this pre-modern structure, a system built on hierarchy, mastery, and the singular power of the original artifact. The universal man in a world of patrons. Leonardo da Vinci's identity is synonymous with the concept of the Renaissance man, a polymath whose intellectual curiosity and creative genius seemed boundless. His contemporary, the biographer Giorgio Vasari, described him as a figure marvelously endowed by heaven with beauty, grace and talent in such abundance that he leaves other men far behind, possessing qualities that transcended nature. This perception of a universal genius, equally adept as a painter, scientist, inventor, and engineer, forms the bedrock of his legend. However, this genius did not operate in a vacuum. Leonardo's entire career was inextricably linked to and dependent upon the hierarchical structure of Renaissance patronage. His trajectory was not one of modern self-directed entrepreneurship, but was meticulously shaped by the commissions and employment of the most powerful entities of his time. His rise was catapulted by the Medici family of Florence, the prodigious banking clan who provided not just the financial muscle, but also a vibrant intellectual environment teeming with scholars, theologians, and fellow artists. Under the guidance of Lorenzo de' Medici, Leonardo was steered toward the high-profile projects that would establish his reputation. This dependence on patronage is most clearly illustrated by his move to Milan in 1482, where he entered the service of Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. The nature of this relationship reveals the pre-modern role of the artist as a multi-talented court employee. Leonardo's famous letter of application to Sforza strategically foregrounded his skills as a military engineer, listing 10 points of his abilities in designing weapons, bridges, and fortifications, only hinting at his artistic talents at the very end. He understood that his value to the Duke was multifaceted. During his 17 years in Milan, Sforza kept him busy not only with monumental artistic projects like the Last Supper and the never-completed equestrian statue of Francesco Sforza, but also with designing elaborate court festivals and a vast array of military machinery. This pattern continued throughout his life. After Sforza's fall, Leonardo found employment with the ruthless military leader Cesare Borgia, serving primarily as a military engineer designing fortifications. His final years were spent in France under the patronage of King Francis I, who granted him the title of premier painter and engineer and architect of the king, and provided him with a comfortable residence and stipend. This model defines the artist as a supreme craftsman and intellectual whose work is legitimized and directed by the ruling class. The relationship, while symbiotic, the artist received financial security and status, while the patron received cultural prestige, entertainment, and practical engineering, was fundamentally hierarchical. Leonardo's ability to create and exert influence was not seized through mass appeal, but was granted and mediated by the established power structures of the court, the nobility, and the church. His cultural impact was profound, but it was channeled through and validated by this elite system. B. Influence through mastery and dissemination. The mechanism of Leonardo's influence was as distinct as its source. It flowed directly from the creation of a small number of unique, masterful objects that introduced new artistic paradigms and visual technologies. His influence was not based on the volume of his output, a mere 15 to 18 paintings are attributed to him, but on the revolutionary quality of each work. Each painting is described as an invention, an archetype to be picked up and developed by other artists. His innovations fundamentally altered the course of Western art. The introduction of the pyramidal compositional device, notably in works like Madonna and Child with Saint Anne, created a sense of harmony and stability that was famously picked up and perfected by Raphael. His pioneering use of sfumato, the subtle, smoky blurring of outlines, allowed for a new psychological depth and atmospheric realism. Similarly, his use of atmospheric perspective, rendering distant landscapes in a blue haze, became a staple of landscape painters for the next 4 centuries. These were not mere stylistic flourishes. They were new ways of seeing and representing the world, born from his intense study of optics, anatomy, and nature, much of which is documented in the staggering 5,000 pages of notes and drawings he left behind. The dissemination of this influence followed a clear, top-down path. It spread primarily through his workshop, or bottega. As an apprentice in the studio of Andrea del Verrocchio, Leonardo learned a multitude of crafts, from painting and sculpture to metalwork and botany. He later established his own workshop, where followers and apprentices would learn his techniques by studying and imitating his masterpieces. Artists like Giampitrino became known for disseminating Leonardo's style across Europe by creating copies and variations of his work. This model establishes a clear hierarchy of influence, from the master's original creation to the apprentice's faithful copy, a direct, person-to-person transmission of knowledge and style. At the heart of this entire model is a concept of value rooted in scarcity, and what the 20th century philosopher Walter Benjamin would term the aura of the original artwork. The immense cultural power of the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper is predicated on their absolute uniqueness. They are singular objects bearing the tangible trace of the master's hand, embodying his inimitable genius. The value system that elevates Leonardo is based on rarity, the mystique of individual creativity, and the authenticity of the one-of-a-kind object. It was this very system, built on the sanctity of the original and the genius of its creator, that Andy Warhol's entire artistic project was designed to systematically and gleefully demolish. To clarify the fundamental chasm between these two models of cultural architecture, the following table provides a comparative summary. It distills the core tenets of the Leonardesque paradigm, establishing the traditional framework against which Warhol's revolution, detailed in the subsequent sections, can be measured. Table 1. Models of artistic influence, Da Vinci vs. Warhol. Pipe tribute pipe Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance model, pipe Andy Warhol, pop model, pipe pipe dash 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 pipe dash 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 pipe dash 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 pipe. Pipe source of income and power pipe patronage, court, church, nobility, pipe self-generated, art market, commerce, licensing, pipe concept of originality, and the artwork pipe the unique, masterful, auric object pipe the mass-produced, serialized, commodified image pipe role of the artist pipe universal genius, master craftsman, courtly intellectual pipe brand, producer, media figure, machine pipe relationship to fame and celebrity pipe a byproduct of masterful work and elite recognition pipe a primary subject, medium, and product pipe primary mechanism of influence pipe top-down dissemination through masterpieces, and apprenticeship pipe network dissemination through mass media and cultural ubiquity pipe relationship to high versus low culture pipe creator and arbiter of high culture pipe deliberate collapse of the distinction between high and low pipe section 2, the Warholian revolution, a new philosophy of the image. The cultural architecture designed by Andy Warhol was built upon a philosophical foundation that systematically inverted every tenet of the Leonardesque model, where Leonardo sought to capture the depth of the human and natural world through meticulous study and masterful technique. Warhol embraced the surface, the fleeting, and the commercial. His revolution was not merely aesthetic but conceptual. He proposed a new way of seeing and valuing the world, one that recognized the overwhelming power of mass media and consumerism in shaping modern identity. This new philosophy required a new medium, and in the commercial process of screen printing, Warhol found the perfect tool to execute his vision, transforming the very definition of art, originality, and the artist's role in society. 2. I want to be a machine, the philosophy of the surface. Andy Warhol's artistic philosophy was a direct and profound response to the socio-economic conditions of post-World War II America. This was an era of unprecedented economic prosperity, fueled by mass production and a burgeoning consumer culture. The proliferation of mass media, television, radio, and print advertising created a new visual landscape, a world saturated with brands, logos, and celebrity images. Warhol's genius was in recognizing that this commercial surface was not a trivial distraction from a deeper reality. It was the new reality. His philosophy, therefore, was one that celebrated and critiqued this surface. His iconic works, from the Campbell soup cans, 1962, to the Coca-Cola bottles, were a deliberate elevation of the mundane to the status of high art. This act was a radical civilianization of art, shifting its focus from the elite concerns of abstract expressionism to the objects and images of everyday public life. In doing so, he challenged the very notion of value. As he famously observed, "What's great about this country is that America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same things as the poorest. You can be watching TV and see a Coca-Cola, and you know that the president drinks Coke, Liz Taylor drinks Coke, and just think, you can drink Coke, too." This democratic accessibility of the consumer object became a central tenet of his work. This embrace of the commercial was explicit and unapologetic. His statement, "Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art, and good business is the best art," was not a cynical quip but a foundational principle. It represented a complete merger of the aesthetic and the commercial, a direct refutation of the patronage model, where art was seen as above the grubby world of commerce. His work became, as one analysis suggests, a masterpiece of consumption, a meta-commentary on a world where everything, including art itself, had become a commodity. To achieve this, Warhol sought to remove the artist's expressive hand, to erase the emotional depth that was the hallmark of previous art movements. His famous declaration, "I want to be a machine," was a manifesto for this new approach. By aspiring to the impersonal, repetitive, and efficient nature of a machine, he aimed to mirror the processes of industrial manufacture and mass media that were defining his time. This philosophy was not a simple, linear progression. It was a complex and often contradictory cycle, moving from an initial, strategic embrace of commercialism, his A point, to a later exploration of darker, more existential themes like celebrity, death, and disaster, his B point, before returning to a sophisticated, satirical fusion of the two in his later work. This constant interplay between the superficial and the profound, the commercial and the critical, is the source of his enduring complexity. 2. B. The medium as a statement, screen printing and the end of originality. Warhol's choice of silk screen printing was the perfect technical embodiment of his philosophical project. The medium, also known as serigraphy, had a long history, but its modern application was primarily commercial, used for printing advertisements, wallpaper, and t-shirts. By adopting this industrial technique for fine art, Warhol was making a powerful statement. He was not just choosing a method. He was importing the logic of mass production directly into the gallery space, a move that would forever blur the lines between art and commerce. Screen printing allowed Warhol to achieve his goal of becoming a machine. The process enabled him to produce multiple versions of the same image, blurring the lines between original artwork and mass production. He wanted his paintings to look as if they had been printed by a machine, with no visible brushstrokes, mimicking the flat, impersonal quality of newspaper photographs and advertisements. This mechanical aesthetic was a direct assault on the traditional value placed on the artist's unique, expressive touch, the very aura of the Leonardesque masterpiece. Repetition, facilitated by the silkscreen, became one of his most powerful artistic strategies. By reproducing images of consumer goods and celebrities ad infinitum, as in Maryland diptych or green Coca-Cola bottles, Warhol highlighted the monotony and shallowness of contemporary life and the relentless, saturating nature of consumer culture. The grid of soup cans or Maryland faces becomes a visual representation of the supermarket shelf or the endless loop of media coverage. This process fundamentally challenged the concept of originality. However, a fascinating tension exists within his work. While the images were mechanically reproduced, the process itself allowed for subtle variations. Off-register printing, uneven ink application, and deliberate, vibrant color choices ensured that each print, while part of a series, was also a distinct object. This clever balance between uniformity and individuality allowed Warhol to have it both ways. He could critique mass production, while simultaneously creating a new, highly lucrative market for unique variations within a series. He created new categories of artistic value, limited editions, artists' proofs, child proofs, that redefined what an original could be in the age of mechanical reproduction. This approach signaled a profound philosophical shift in the nature of artistic representation itself. Leonardo da Vinci painted the woman, Lisa Gherardini, to create the Mona Lisa. Andy Warhol, in contrast, took a 1953 publicity photograph of Norma Jean Mortensen to create his image of Marilyn Monroe. His subject was not the person but the image of the person as it existed in the public sphere, already processed and packaged by the mass media. His art is therefore a meta-commentary, a representation of a representation. As one analysis aptly puts it, a Warhol Coke bottle painting is not a representation of a bottle, but a representation of an ad for a Coke bottle that has within it its own representation of a Coke bottle. His sources were never life itself, but life as it was mediated through newspapers, magazines, and publicity shots. In doing so, Warhol was not just painting pictures. He was providing the visual language for a postmodern world, a world where the distinction between reality and its simulation had begun to irrevocably collapse. Section 3. The Factory as Cultural Engine, Manufacturing Art, Fame, and Reality. If Warhol's philosophy provided the blueprint for a new cultural architecture, the factory was its physical construction. More than a mere artist's studio in the traditional sense, the factory was Warhol's most comprehensive and radical innovation, an integrated, multi-platform production house for culture itself. It was the living embodiment of his ideas, a space where the conceptual collapse of boundaries, between art and commerce, production and socializing, reality and performance, was made manifest. From its silver-lined walls, Warhol engineered not just paintings and prints, but films, music, magazines, and a new form of celebrity, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem that would become the prototype for modern media empires. 3. A. The Silver Factory, a social and production nexus. Located in various Manhattan locations between 1963 and 1987, the factory was, from its inception, a conceptual statement. The name itself was a deliberate appropriation of industrial language, signaling a departure from the romantic notion of the artist's garret and an alignment with the world of manufacture and mass production. The most iconic iteration, the Silver Factory on East 47th Street, was famously decorated by Warhol's collaborator Billy Name with aluminum foil and silver paint, creating a shimmering, otherworldly environment that was both a workspace and a perfectly glamorous, media-ready backdrop. This space functioned as a crucible where art, music, and celebrity collided in an explosion of creative energy. It was, on one level, a literal production line. Here, Warhol and his assistants, referred to as factory workers, produced a dizzying array of art, from silkscreen paintings and sculptures to commissioned portraits. This method of production challenged traditional notions of artistic authorship. Regardless of the degree of collaboration, the final products were attributed solely to the anti-Warhol brand, redefining the artist's role from solitary creator to executive producer. Simultaneously, the factory was the undisputed epicenter of New York's counterculture. It was the hip hangout spot for an eclectic mix of people, artists, musicians like Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, and Mick Jagger, writers such as Truman Capote, Hollywood celebrities, and a coterie of bohemian eccentrics and socialites. It served as a rehearsal space for the influential rock band The Velvet Underground, whom Warhol managed and incorporated into his multimedia spectacle, The Exploding Plastic Inevitable. Crucially, the factory was also a vital hub for New York's queer community, providing a space where queerness and gender fluidity could be flaunted and explored at a time when they were still deeply taboo in mainstream society. This fusion of art production and social experimentation blurred the lines between work and life, creating a space where the creative process was inseparable from the scene that surrounded it. 3. B. The cinematic gaze, manufacturing superstars. Quotes. Within this cultural engine, Warhol's film camera became a primary tool for manufacturing his most ephemeral yet influential product, fame. Between 1963 and 1968, he produced a staggering volume of cinematic work, including nearly 60 films and some 500 short, silent portrait films called screen tests. His cinematic aesthetic was as radical as his painting, characterized by a static camera, unedited long takes, and a focus on mundane or non-narrative events. His films created a new, voyeuristic gaze. Works like Sleep, 1964, which features poet John Giorno sleeping for over 5 hours, or Empire, 1964, an 8-hour stationary shot of the Empire State Building, challenged the very definition of cinema, forcing the audience to confront the passage of time and their own act of watching. More significantly, this cinematic process became a mechanism for creating a new type of celebrity, the Warhol superstar. These were not professional actors but charismatic, often eccentric personalities drawn from his circle, such as Eddie Sedgwick, Viva, Candy Darling, and Joe D'Alessandro. Warhol dubbed them superstars in a direct, albeit subversive, nod to the Hollywood star system. Unlike Hollywood stars, however, their adventures were often the unscripted activities of daily life, talking, sleeping, getting dressed, thus collapsing the distinction between performance and reality. They were famous simply for being filmed, for being in Warhol's orbit. This process prefigured the logic of reality television and modern influencer culture. The superstars were living embodiments of Warhol's ideas about the commodification of identity and the fleeting nature of fame. Their lives, dramas, and personas became the raw material for Warhol's art. This relationship, however, was often deeply exploitative. While Warhol's fame and market value grew, many of his superstars, whose stories and charisma were central to the factory's allure, met tragic ends, their cultural capital subsumed by the Warhol brand. The legacy of the superstar is a complex one, representing both a radical democratization of fame and a cautionary tale about the human cost of being turned into a cultural commodity. The chronicle of their lives is immortalized in Lou Reed's iconic song Walk on the Wild Side, which names many of the key figures from this era. 3. C. Codifying cool, Interview magazine and the media apparatus. In 1969, Warhol extended the factory's cultural production model into print with the creation of Interview magazine. Co-founded with journalist John Wilcock, the magazine was initially conceived as a film journal, and, pragmatically, as a way to get press passes for film festivals, but it quickly evolved into something far more significant. Nicknamed the Crystal Ball of Pop, Interview became the official chronicle of Warhol's world, a de facto extension of the Factory's ethos that institutionalized his social network and turned his social life into media content. The magazine's format was revolutionary. It pioneered a new style of celebrity journalism characterized by raw, unedited, and conversational interviews, often conducted by other celebrities. Warhol himself would carry a tape recorder, which he called his wife, to parties and social events, capturing conversations that would be published as literal transcriptions, complete with stutters and interruptions. This created a false sense of intimacy, giving readers the feeling of eavesdropping on private conversations between the era's most glamorous figures and blurring the line between authentic dialogue and public relations. This format is now the dominant mode of celebrity-focused podcasts and YouTube channels. Interview was a key component of the self-perpetuating cultural ecosystem Warhol had built. The magazine featured the artists, musicians, and superstars who populated the Factory, solidifying their status and amplifying the Factory's mystique. The magazine itself became an art object, with its distinctive logo and iconic illustrated covers by artist Richard Bernstein, which transformed celebrities into vibrant pop icons. Warhol, in his role as ambassador, would personally distribute copies on the streets of New York, further merging his own persona with his media product. The true genius of the Factory, then, was not merely as a studio, but as a networked system. The art sales funded the films and the magazine. The films and magazine created the celebrity cachet of the superstars and the Warhol brand. This celebrity cachet, in turn, attracted more cultural figures, media attention, and wealthy patrons, which drove up the market value of the arts. This closed, self-reinforcing loop, where content, celebrity, and commerce feed each other, is the essential blueprint for 21st century media conglomerates and the personal branding machines of today's top influencers. Section IV, the artist as brand, the business of being anti-Warhol. Andy Warhol's most radical and enduring creation was not a painting or a film, but himself. He meticulously constructed Andy Warhol as a commercial brand, a living, breathing product that embodied his artistic philosophy and revolutionized the public's understanding of what an artist could be. This project involved two parallel strategies. First, the complete and unapologetic merger of his artistic practice with commercial enterprise, and second, the cultivation of a public persona so iconic and controlled that it became the ultimate commodity. In doing so, Warhol did not just create a business. He created the definitive blueprint for the modern artist as celebrity, a model that has since become the default for cultural figures in the age of the influencer. IV. A. Good business is the best art, the merger of art and commerce. Warhol's entire career was a systematic dismantling of the traditional barrier between the sacred space of art and the profane world of commerce. Unlike Leonardo da Vinci, who operated within a system of elite patronage, Warhol became his own patron, strategically using commercial ventures to fund his more experimental artistic projects. His famous declaration, "Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art, and good business is the best art," was the guiding principle of his empire. This philosophy was rooted in his origins. Before he was a pop art icon, Warhol was one of New York's most successful commercial illustrators in the 1950s, creating whimsical and award-winning advertisements for clients like I. Miller Shoes and Glamour magazine. This background gave him an intimate understanding of branding, advertising, and consumer desire, a language he would later import directly into his fine art. When he made the leap to the art world, he did so by taking the very subjects of commerce, soup cans, Brillo boxes, Coca-Cola bottles, and presenting them as art. He famously embraced the commodification of his work at a time when many artists still clung to romantic ideals of artistic purity. He transformed his art practice into a formidable business. In the 1970s and 1980s, his commissioned portraits of celebrities and wealthy socialites became a major enterprise. charging upwards of $25,000 per portrait. This business became the financial engine that funded his other ventures, including his films and interview magazine. He effectively turned the traditional portrait, once a symbol of aristocratic patronage, into a luxury consumer good for the new celebrity class. Furthermore, Warhol pioneered the concept of the artist as a licensing powerhouse. This represented a complete inversion of the traditional power dynamic. Where Leonardo sought employment from patrons, Warhol built a brand so powerful that other corporations sought him out, paying to associate their products with his cultural cachet. His collaborations ranged from designing album covers for the Rolling Stones and the Velvet Underground to creating advertising campaigns for brands like Perrier, Absolute Vodka, and, posthumously, Burger King, which used footage of him eating a Whopper in a 2019 Super Bowl ad. The Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts continues this legacy today through an extensive and award-winning licensing program, partnering with global brands from Dior and Calvin Klein to Uniqlo and Comme des Garçons. In this new model, the artist is not a supplicant seeking funds from a patron. The artist is the source of cultural capital that commerce pays to access. IV.B. Inventing Andy, the persona as ultimate product. While his business ventures were revolutionary, Warhol's most meticulously crafted product was his own public persona. The Andy Warhol, known to the world, the shy, mumbling figure with the silver fright wig, dark sunglasses, and deadpan, evasive answers, was a deliberate and brilliant performance. He was one of the first public figures to understand that in a media age, identity itself could be branded and marketed. He was not just selling art. He was selling Andy Warhol. This persona was the living embodiment of his artistic philosophy. It was a blank, machine-like surface onto which the media and the public could project their own fascinations, desires, and anxieties about art and fame. His signature look was a carefully maintained brand identity, as consistent and recognizable as the Coca-Cola logo. His public utterances were masterpieces of strategic ambiguity. He would often adopt a guise of a fool or play naive, making it difficult to pin down his intentions while simultaneously generating endless speculation and media coverage. This detached, aloof character was both a powerful artistic tool and a strategic shield. It protected his intensely private inner life while perfectly mirroring a media culture that was increasingly obsessed with surface over substance. By saying almost nothing, he reflected everything. Even the most dramatic event of his life, the 1968 assassination attempt by Valery Solanas, was ultimately incorporated into the Warhol brand story. After his recovery, he strategically used the immense public attention, giving interviews about the experience and allowing fashion photographer Richard Avedon to document his surgical scars. He even sold prints that had been damaged in the shooting, transforming a near-death experience into another layer of his public mythos. This act demonstrates his unparalleled ability to treat every aspect of his life as material to be curated, packaged, and sold as part of the Andy Warhol product. This transformation of the artist's life into a continuous, monetizable performance provided the ultimate template for the 21st century culture of celebrity and influence. Section V, the Warholian legacy, living in the future he architected. The influence of Andy Warhol is not a historical footnote. It is the structural framework of contemporary culture. His innovations in art, commerce, and media were so foundational that we now inhabit the world he envisioned. His legacy is empirically proven by his continued dominance of the art market and his constant presence in major cultural institutions. More profoundly, his conceptual blueprint can be traced through the work of subsequent generations of artists, designers, and musicians. Ultimately, Warhol's most prophetic contribution was the operational logic that now governs our digital reality. The culture of social media, personal branding, and the influencer economy is the ultimate realization of the Warholian project. We are all, in a sense, living in the future that Andy built. V.A. The enduring market, institutional validation and commercial dominance. Decades after his death in 1987, Andy Warhol's position in the art world is not just secure, it is dominant. The market for his work remains one of the most robust and liquid sectors of contemporary art, demonstrating consistent growth and resilience. His work commands staggering prices at auction, cementing his status as a blue-chip artist whose value is both cultural and financial. The 2022 sale of his 1964 silkscreen shot Sage Blue Maryland for $195 million made it the most expensive work by an American artist ever sold at auction, a powerful testament to his monumental market power. This commercial dominance is reinforced by unwavering institutional validation. Major museums around the world, including the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the museum dedicated solely to him in his hometown of Pittsburgh, the Andy Warhol Museum, actively preserve, study, and promote his legacy through major exhibitions. Exhibitions like Good Business, Andy Warhol's screen prints, continue to unpack the complexities of his practice for new generations, ensuring his scholarly relevance. This symbiotic relationship between the market and the museum creates a feedback loop that perpetually reinforces Warhol's importance. Furthermore, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts acts as a powerful steward of his legacy, managing his copyrights and overseeing a vast, award-winning licensing program that keeps his imagery in constant circulation, fulfilling his goal of merging art with everyday life. B. The Warhol Effect, tracing the blueprint in contemporary culture. Warhol's influence radiates far beyond the gallery and auction house, forming a direct lineage that can be traced across virtually every field of cultural production. In the art world, his legacy is most visible in the work of artists who have adopted his model of the artist as brand, and his critical engagement with consumerism and celebrity. Figures like Jeff Koons, with his factory-like studio and elevation of kitsch objects. Damien Hirst, with his focus on branding, depth, and the art market. And Takashi Murakami, with his super-flat theory that merges Japanese pop culture with fine art, are all direct descendants of Warhol's methodology. The anonymous street artist Banksy engages in a direct dialogue with Warhol, reinterpreting his motifs to offer a more overt political critique. Banksy's Tesco value soup cans, for instance, is a clear homage to Warhol's Campbell's series, but it substitutes the iconic American brand with a British budget label to comment on class inequality and capitalism's failures. In fashion, Warhol's impact is twofold. First, his artwork has been directly appropriated by countless designers. The super dress of the 1960s was an early example, followed by high-fashion collections from his friends Halston and Steven Sprouse, and later by major houses like Versace, Jeremy Scott for Moschino, and Raf Simons for Calvin Klein, who used Warhol's Darker Death and Disaster series in a 2018 collection. Second, and more fundamentally, his career as a commercial illustrator and his blurring of art and commerce legitimized the now commonplace collaboration between artists and fashion brands. In music, his influence was transformative. As manager and producer for the Velvet Underground, he fostered a sound that was radically different from mainstream rock and roll. His iconic album cover designs for the band's debut, The Velvet Underground and Nico, the interactive peelable banana, and the Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers, featuring a functional zipper, turned the record sleeve into a conceptual, interactive art object, forever changing the relationship between visual art and music packaging. In film and television, his experimental, voyeuristic style and focus on fringe characters paved the way for generations of independent and avant-garde filmmakers, from the new queer cinema of Gus Van Sant to the stylized alienation of Jim Jarmusch and the grotesque Americana of David Lynch. His deadpan, reality-based aesthetic, which found a home in his own television shows like Andy Warhol's TV, prefigured the rise of reality television and the mockumentary style. He even produced segments for Saturday Night Live, directly infusing his sensibility into mainstream broadcast media. V.C. From 15 minutes of fame to the influencer age. To conclude, Andy Warhol's ultimate legacy lies in his role as the architect of our contemporary media reality. His famous, though perhaps apocryphally attributed, prediction that in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes has transcended prophecy to become a fundamental premise of 21st century culture. It is no longer a startling observation, but the assumed operational logic upon which entire industries, from reality television to the vast economy of viral content and influencer marketing, are built. The modern influencer is the ultimate Warholian superstar. They are individuals who meticulously curate a public persona, collapsing the distinction between their private life and a public performance. They build a personal brand across multiple media platforms, just as Warhol leveraged his paintings, films, and magazine in a self-reinforcing ecosystem. They monetize their identity, turning their lifestyle into a commodity through endorsements, collaborations, and sponsored content. They deal in the currency of fleeting attention, understanding that fame is transient and must be constantly managed and reproduced. The entire culture of being famous for being famous is a direct inheritance of the model Warhol pioneered with his superstars at the factory. Warhol's philosophy has become our reality. His central contradiction remains the most challenging aspect of his legacy. On one hand, his project was profoundly democratic. He broke down the elitist barriers of the art world, using accessible, everyday imagery to argue that art, like Coca-Cola, was for everyone. On the other hand, he achieved this democratization by fully embracing the logic of commodification, a process that turns everything, art, celebrity, rebellion, and even personal identity, into a product to be packaged, marketed, and sold. This paradox is now at the heart of our digital culture. Social media platforms democratize fame and self-expression, but they do so by compelling users to become personal brands, to market themselves as products within a vast commercial ecosystem. V.D. The unspoken blueprint, architect of queer identity. Beyond the public architecture of fame and the influencer economy, Warhol's most profound and personal legacy may be the blueprint he provided for queer identity in a world that offered few schematics. While his public persona was one of strategic evasion, his queerness was a known and visible fact to those who needed to see it. He was, as described in analyses of his work, a fabulous queen, a fan of prurience and pornography, a great admirer of the male body, whose films were censored for their homosexual content, and celebrated by gay audiences. This was not merely incidental to his work. It was foundational. The factory was more than a production line for art. It was a social and cultural sanctuary where queerness could be openly flaunted when it was still taboo. It was a physical manifestation of a world where drag queens, transgender figures like Candy Darling and Holly Woodlawn, and bohemian eccentrics were not just tolerated but centered as superstars. For a generation grappling with identities outside the heteronormative mainstream, this ecosystem provided a crucial proof of concept. A world existed where they were not only visible but vital. His art served as a direct vehicle for this validation. The poignant Ladies and Gentlemen series, commissioned in the 1970s, elevated the marginalized drag queen community of Manhattan to the status of high art portraiture, a radical act of recognition. His films, with their voyeuristic gaze on homosexuality, transvestitism, drugs and various other X-rated activities, brought the counterculture into the gallery, creating a space for queer narratives long before they were permissible in mainstream media. This work actively paved the way for future expression. It is considered unthinkable that later landmarks of queer cinema could have been made without Warhol's precedent. He is rightly seen as a godfather of new queer cinema, having directly inspired filmmakers who would later bring homosexual relationships to the screen. For those who came of age in the decades that followed, discovering Warhol's world through his diaries or the pages of interview was akin to finding a map to an undiscovered country. In the liminal space of adolescent confusion, his work offered a vocabulary and a visual landscape for feelings that had no name in the wider culture. It provided a framework for understanding that one's own private sense of being different was not an isolated anomaly but part of a vibrant, creative, and defiant lineage. Warhol, in his most lasting act of cultural architecture, cleared a path. He did not just create a space for his own celebrity, but a space for countless others to find their way, to have their own moments of sudden, brilliant realization, and to understand that they, too, could build a self from the materials he had left behind.